Since this is a technique video, I'm gonna want to address one of the comments that comes up all the time, which is, yeah, technique, but that only works if you're super strong, or you have all these people who are strong and they're just kind of masking that by saying it's a technique thing. Yeah, fair, but at the same time, no matter how strong you are, there's always more you can get out of it with technique. It may seem at first like you're not getting the traction that you want and you just need to be stronger, but I can't emphasize enough the merit of assuming that you're strong enough to do these moves, and with that in mind, kind of think to yourself, like, if I'm strong enough to do this, what am I missing? That opens up so many doors and allows much faster learning than you would get really any other way. So anyways, I see the argument, but I invite you to try, and I think that you'll see a lot of benefit with it. We had the opportunity this time to actually go out to Waco Tanks ourselves, and US Olympian Jesse Grupper and I climbed the boulders that were submitted to us. By walking through this checklist of cues, it will hopefully give you a really clear real-world opportunity to see how you can use these methods to improve your own climbing, but also the things that you can look for to get the most out of any footage that you might take and change a library of falls into valuable learning opportunities. Our first climb today is from Nick, and he's doing a super fun board-style climb called Shamu. It tracks up and left here, just to kind of squeeze in between the classic Free Willy and an old school V2 that cuts out left. So really nice tensiony climbing on, I think, fairly comfortable rounded crimps that culminates in a crux dyno at the end of the climb, which is what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to try to work through 4 specific points that I think almost always give good guidance and at least get you looking in the right direction. The first one is to watch what happens with the foot and knee position, seeing how they're loaded, where the feet and knees track, which point pops first, and if there's any rotation in the knee or hips that seems to affect the climb. At first, you're just looking for anything that looks a little bit odd and catches your eye. Second, I like to look at where the counter motion is. Do they bounce? If they do, in what direction? And where does their kind of dyno initiate? So in this case, it's a fairly straight bounce down, hips thrust in, and jump. After that, I try to see where the dead point begins. This is going to be where the movement is quietest. So when your body stops moving up, you have sort of a vertical dead point. So you see how it goes from essentially this straight line initially, and then kind of right here, his hips transition over and start dropping out more or less like this. At almost exactly the same point, we see that the shoulders stop right here. See how those are almost exactly at the same time? Now, the final thing is I like to look at the shoulder orientation as well as kind of the scapular set to see if you're in a position that lets you control the bottom hand, the control hand, as much as possible, and that your shoulders are oriented to point towards the target hand. Now, given that those are sort of our 4 questions, we can kind of go through this video and see what key takeaways there might be and what an analysis of this video might look like. So, starting with the feet, I notice first that his left foot blows off almost immediately. As soon as he bounces and starts generating here, we see that this left foot kicks out like this. This tells me that he's not being able to press into the wall as much as he would like, and that the force is starting to go along the wall. We've talked about this in other videos, but the force that you're getting through your foot comes basically exactly in the line of hip to foot here. So if the force is now going too far along the wall because the foot blows off, it tells us that the hips have come in too far when the feet start pressing. So we can see as he drops down and boosts, drops, hips thrust hard into the wall. Right here, the foot pushes, leg straightens, and blows off of the hold. Second, we take a look at the right side as much as we can. Places the right foot, bounces down, starts pushing on the right leg, and we see something funny happens with his foot here. Maybe a little bit hard to tell what's going on at first, but we just sort of notice that 1, it blows before the leg is completely straight, and 2, we're getting this kind of funny like torque as the heel pushes off to the right. Boop. And kind of rolls sideways along the ankle. So you can kind of see how the shoe kind of rotates this way. So both of those things are little imperfections that are going to steer a more accurate dyno here. And since Nick has his hand on the finishing hold already, I think any of these little tweaks could get him there. Are you constantly lost trying to find your boulder? Stumbling into epic approaches where you expected your project, and vexed that the world never looks like the map? Well, look no further. Today I managed to track down Mark, a longtime friend, great guy, good climber, and one of the co-founders of Kyra, and he's here to tell you a couple of things about the app.
Yeah, so the guidebooks are awesome. They're like my favorite feature personally. For people who want to climb outdoors, it's a great way to navigate. You can never get lost again and spend less time faffing, less time epicking, and more time climbing.
I'm obviously partial as a guidebook author, but I feel like one of the other cool features of Kyra is the vast library of beta videos. So you can basically make friends, learn faster, and ideally send with less punting.
Yeah, thanks, man. So on top of all that, each subscription goes to supporting local climbing authors such as yourself, local climbing organizations, and the Access Fund, who are doing all the hard work and taking care of the places that we love and play. Check out the guidebook features, and hope you have a rad time climbing with homies outside.
We'll get into some of the corrections here in a second, but we see a couple of little issues with the foot motion, and that takes us to the second point, which is the counter motion. Because the hips are dropping out and then straight in, it's getting us into a position where he's unable to load his feet optimally. We can see in our comparison video here, we can see that Nick drops basically straight down and then jumps up along this blue line, moving relatively linearly up towards the target hold. Meanwhile, even though it's only a small change, we can see that my left knee is tucked in a little bit more than his is, and I begin my motion by dropping down and left, which lets me initiate first up and right, shifting across my right foot, and then pulling back up to the finish hold here, producing a somewhat arcing motion, which both lets me take maximal advantage of my right foot. It keeps my left foot pasted throughout the entire movement, and it gets me out of the way of my hand so that I'm able to pull down along my body rather than getting kind of boxed into the top hand here. All right, now that we've looked at the foot and knee setup and how they track during the course of the move, as well as the initiation of the movement with the counter motion, we start to look a little bit deeper into the dead point. So I'm gonna actually unlink these so we can look a little bit in isolation, but we see that the dead point on Nick's video here comes right here where he starts dropping out in the hips and the shoulders first stop elevating, and he's still a little bit shy of the target hold here. On my video on the left, we get this little bounce down and left. You can see a little bit differently from this side view, but down and left, hips up and in as I boost up and over that right foot, and my hips start coming out right here. So we go from this kind of line up, and I begin dropping away kind of along this line, sort of perpendicular, right as my hand lands on the target hold here. So we did try pretty conscientiously to demo this, but I think this is pretty much what you want, which is where the hand is landing right on the target hold, right as the momentum stops, and you have the sort of like easiest, gentlest catch. But if things are off a little bit, it tells you pretty straight away what it is that you need to do. So if we notice that Nick's hips are falling back before he gets to the hold, he needs to shift the timing so that he starts stepping up first before his hips start coming in. This is going to load the left foot better and shift him across some more. And he needs to, after kind of staggering that timing just slightly, also give it just a little more push into the wall as he boosts off of the right foot. So a little bit more height and a little bit later sort of like thrust into the wall. We'll delay this just by a fraction of a second and give him all the time that he needs to land this hold. A lot of times these things are really quite subtle. I mean, these differences are only a frame or two, so it's a fraction of a second. Because of that, while you can feel out a lot of these things or get good cues from your climbing partner, it's really, really helpful to take video when you're trying to refine a dead point or really any crux move outside. The tiny things that make the biggest differences are just sort of invisible otherwise. So I can't recommend strongly enough taking regular videos of yourself climbing. Now, the final thing is sort of the arrival position. So we've looked at how people are starting the jump with the feet and the knees, how they're initiating the jump with the counter motion, where the jump is taking them, which is the dead point moment, and then finally the position that they arrive in, which is what their body's doing kind of when they get to that final position. So what I'm looking at specifically in this case is shoulder orientation. I'm gonna swap back to this other video real quick because I think it gives a clearer view. Though you can kind of see here what we're gonna talk about, which is this tight twist across the body so that I'm pointing my shoulders at the finishing hold. Meanwhile, though we're biased in the correct direction and he is loading up on this left hand, sorry, you'll have to forgive OnForm, it's not always a dream. While he is loading up on this left hand, you can also see that his shoulders are not pointing as directly to the target hold as they could be. Now, changing over to a front-on view, you can see what I mean about sort of trying to point the shoulder here. So, as with all these points, there's sort of an infinite amount of complexity as you dig deeper and deeper, but the two things that I try to really focus on as far as shoulder positioning is, first, I want my shoulders to be somewhat biased towards the control hand. So whatever the hand is that's on the wall that's doing the kind of pulling and stabilizing, rather than the hand that I'm moving to. When you're keeping your feet on, it's really helpful to try to arrive at the target hold kind of as straight as possible, since that allows you to be in a stronger position on the bottom. When you're jumping to a hold, it is kind of important to shift into a somewhat more bent and shared position so that you're able to also control and stabilize on the top hand. But what we're looking for here is that I'm facing towards the left hand at least a little bit. I'm kind of shared between sort of looking at my hand, but I'm not completely rotated in, which is going to short me. And over the course of the movement, as I step up off of the right foot, I immediately start driving up with my right shoulder, twisting in with my left arm, and really trying to like point and aim as much as I can up towards the finishing hold here. This is one of those things that can be a little bit tricky to cue initially, but if you take the chance, the time to kind of figure out that motion, it really pays huge dividends, because I can essentially get 4 to 6 inches of free reach here with negligible extra strength. So instead of being shorted like this, as I pull through, if I can just take this distance, I get this whole increase in reach just by sort of rotating my chest. Anyways, to summarize and also show how I would use this checklist to make specific recommendations, we see how first, the left foot blowing off suggests that we want to drop a little bit more down and left and begin the motion by straightening that left leg, taking as much advantage out of the off foot as possible. This is going to help drive across and over the right leg, which is going to keep us from twisting in and blowing off of the wall here quite as much. Additionally, with moves like this, your knee is almost always going to want to rotate into the wall. Humans naturally jump more out of a neutral position, and you have to either train yourself to consciously not do that, staying in an open position and jumping like this, or by pacing your movements so your hips are just a little bit further out from the wall and your knee and your leg is a little bit straighter before you rotate in, so that your knee doesn't hit the wall and rotate you off of the foot. But just by correcting the timing on the left foot, it's going to drive us a little bit further over to the right, which is going to slightly slow that out to in of the hips, which will help you line up your out to in timing with the arrival at the finish hold here. So he'll buy a couple of frames just by delaying this hip thrust from here until after he's a little bit more over the right foot. Being a little bit more over the right foot, he's going to be able to get a little bit more boost out of that, as well as a slightly cleaner pull out of the left hand, which will give him a tiny bit more height. That's going to now shift the vertical component of the dead point just a little bit further, which will give him time to get onto this hand. And I think by having this pause and initiating this sort of pull with his body a little bit further over to the right, he'll be able to get more of that turned shoulder position as he kind of cranks down to get a little bit of extra reach to go with it. So all of this should give him more distance at less effort and a slightly longer pause, like a slightly longer quiet period at the end of the dead point where he can establish on the hold without having to snatch it as violently. Okay, our next climb up is Esperanza. This is a longtime test piece of North Mountain put up by Fred Nicole and is still a highly sought after prize today, almost 20 years later, more than 20 years later. Anyways, this was submitted by Luke, and we have Jesse Grupper demonstrating. So, diving back to our same checklist here, I'm first going to look at the foot positions. I had a quick skim. Both of these look completely reasonable, but there are some slight differences. First, I noticed that Jesse's knee is a little bit further out and his hips are a little bit more open. Second, I noticed that his right foot is at a slightly flatter angle and that Luke's foot is a little bit more pointed. And third, I noticed that Jesse's foot is on, let's see if we can get a better angle on it. Jesse's foot is pushing off of this edge here, while Luke's foot is kind of floating in the cave. Now, there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do this, and there are some moves where it's very advantageous to have your off foot not on a hold. That can help you increase awareness and pressure on the driving foot. But at the same time, when you're looking at two different attempts, especially when you're comparing a stick versus a foot cut and fall, what you're looking for is any kind of difference to start getting information and some ideas about what might be going on. So, now that we see two slightly different setups, I look at the counter motion. And much as with the Shamu video that we just looked at, Jesse begins by dropping down into the left, as we can kind of see here. Oops. You can watch that as he sets up, he shifts towards his left foot and then initiates the push off of the left foot. We can see the knee opening up right here, pushing up and over, and then driving off of the right leg. Meanwhile, Nick drops straight down and away from the wall. This loads his right foot and his arms to pull. He gets a little bit of boost off of the left foot, so he's also initiating off of that a little bit. But in this case, he's going to get a much more straightforward line, a much more straight line of attack for the bone hold. Meanwhile, Jesse sags left, kind of swings right, and takes a somewhat more arcing path, kind of like I did on Shamu, going first this way, and then cutting up towards the bone. So, as this happens, we then step over and look at the dead point. I'm going to unlink these for this so that we can look at the two videos in isolation. First, we look at Nick. Up, 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 up. His hips are driving into the wall. His shoulders are going up. And right here, we see his hips starting to drop away. So that begins right about here. So one of these two. So bounce, up, 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 up. Knee almost hits the wall, and then right here at this point you can see the video really come into focus. You can just see that it's not really as blurry as you get when things are moving. And now it's dropping away. So this is a really well-timed dead point, as I would expect from anybody getting this close on V14. But at the same time, we do see that he's dropping away just a little bit before he gets to this handhold. And has a fraction of a second of his body kind of accelerating away from the wall before it kind of latches in and drops out here. This in part is going to make it a bit harder to keep his foot on, and he's going to get a little bit more swing away here as he's already kind of falling before he starts to catch. Jesse, with his slightly kind of swingier approach here, up and right, up and in. And the point that he pauses is almost exactly as he latches this right hand. So you see that he hits this, and it's right here that he starts falling away. So even with this, he'd probably be psyched if he had a second longer to kind of settle on this hold. But he does hit this at almost the exact dead point, which gives him a little bit more time to stop this motion and settle up on the feet. And finally, we're going to look at the shoulder position where they land. All right, so with these synchronized again, we can see that the shoulder position looks really quite similar between these. Both of them have that good, they're both oriented and destroying the bottom hold here. They also both have their shoulders tilted and facing up kind of as much as is possible to point at the target hold here. This is great. we look for any differences, see if there's some sort of cue or minor tip to be had here. So the main thing that I see, and it's really quite subtle, is that Jesse manages to press into his left hand. And so he keeps a much straighter arm here. Less of the bend going on. Oops. Less of a bend like Nick has. Even though it's fairly minor, we see that the consequences of him sort of locking this hand out is that it drives his left shoulder up a little bit more and gets slightly better scapular engagement so that he stays on a slightly more horizontal line, which is going to let him keep more force into his right foot, which is really the key element to sticking this move. So by kind of keeping that stronger kind of scapular position and getting that like kind of straight pull through the left shoulder, he's able to hinge at the hips a little bit more, staying in this, let's see if I can, yeah, there you go. Staying in this relatively more open position. Meanwhile, Luke gets shorted somewhat and isn't able to keep the foot pressure on that right hold. So I had a chance to chat with Jesse about this a little bit and see if there was any additional kind of cues that he found to be helpful here.
The difference between doing the bone move and not doing the bone move were 3 key components, I would say. Component number 1 is putting your pointer finger on the spike of the left hand hold and wrapping your thumb over the spike as well, kind of sharing it a little bit. Component number 2, which Dan pointed out, is when you're moving for the hold, thinking about pushing your right knee down and over as opposed to going directly up, so that you can engage tension and the foot doesn't pick. And then part number 3 is thinking about the bottom foot, which I feel like is a classic challenge of any move like that, where you're thinking so much about where to grab the hand and how much to push on the right foot, you forget to push on the foot that almost seems like it's not going to do anything, and really dragging it along the wall to add a little bit of tension. And I think that what is cool about the bone move is that it doesn't actually matter so much how you grab the bone itself, but it just matters that you're able to stop the momentum from continuing, and that you're able to keep the right foot on.
As you reach up and start tracking into the bone hold, it was really key to drive the knee in somewhat, as with a drop knee, so that you could rotate your foot and get the most pressure that you possibly could on this toe here. So this kind of transition from open hip position into this sort of closed hip position was really, really important. So in summary, going through the checklist, we first look at the feet, and having watched Jesse's video, we see that potentially it would be useful to shift his left foot onto this crimp from lower in the climb. That will help him get a little bit more bounce out of the initiation and drive in a slightly more arcing pattern up and over the right foot. So by shifting his foot onto this edge, it begins a slightly different counter motion, which is going to be to drop down and left some and then get a little bit more of a swing to initiate up and over the right. This will hopefully let him be a little bit more open hip to drive this right knee just a little bit further, extend his dead point here just a little bit, and line up with a little bit more time on this crux hold so that he's able to maintain tension between hand and feet. And finally, by thinking about the shoulder engagement, he's hopefully able to get just a little bit more pressure on this left hand and kind of suck in with the scapula to keep him in this strong line between hand and foot. As a kind of final note, it's really easy when we're trying any kind of limit move to hyper focus on whatever the crux hand is, but especially when things are as subtle as, well, really anything that you're going to be projecting, you can't really afford to lose focus on the other points. And so it can help quite a lot to try to check in and almost shift the focus away from the moving hand to trying to stabilize the position and keep everything strong and engaged on the wall to support the arrival at the crux hold. Thanks again to Kyra for supporting this video. I've really enjoyed working with him as a guidebook author, and I use the app all the time, both for my own clients, my own trips, and to find inspiration for various videos on this channel. If you want to give it a shot, we have a 20% discount for you if you click the link below. Also, special thanks to Kyra Condie and Jesse Grupper for their help with this video. If you want to see the full uncut sends of the climbs that we showed in this video, as well as the rest of the boulders from our trip, go check out this sick edit from Kyra of our trip to Waco. Also, for everybody that asks, we are using OnForm. It is an app. I wish that I could give it more than that, but it does technically work most of the time, and it allows video comparisons if you have an iPhone. Yeah.